All right, good questions. Thank you so much for your patience there. And we're a people-powered movement, so we believe in people-powered questions. Just because I don't really know what people are, what they want to know about us. So who is the group was one of the first ones out the gates, and that's a really abstract question because you know, you can get into like identity as your politics, or you can get into age demographics or class demographics, all of those things. So I think that's pretty abstract. In the beginning, we had that 1,500 strong march, and that had all kinds of groups there, that had all kinds of people present. And then that was right before we set up the occupation in the park. The occupation has had many, many different supporters and campers come out throughout our time there. We've had, you know, we had a couple of the Raging Grannies spent a couple overnights, just a couple, like not even a week ago, and they said for us to tell people that if they can do it, anyone can be doing it. Right on. We do have all kinds of makeup there. We do have a lot of students and younger people who are spending the time on the overnight. So I guess that sort of gets into the question of how they can afford to be there. A little bit is that they are students, so they're not yet working. Working for a better world is work, though. There's a sort of there's an online support. So there's a lot of people who, I'll get to that question later, how can we support without actually camping out? There's a lot of people who are on our listservs who help out with media releases, and they help out with all kinds of requests. We ask for someone to draft up a pamphlet or draft up a piece of information, or we ask people to write in letters to the editor so that we can sustain a presence everywhere. Occupy the media, occupy everything. So there's that component. There's the people down in the park. There's people who come down and drop off supplies and food and donations, and everything, absolutely everything is appreciated, everything is equally as important and to our movement. So I think that's sort of a profile of who the group is. Bill's going to get into why there's no leaders.
Okay, hello. Sorry about my voice. It's a little raspy and coming in and out. When you live in a park, you kind of get sick, so sorry about that. Why we have no leaders? This question keeps being asked both in the media and especially by the police. Well, the police have a group of 6 or 7 of us that they've identified as the leadership. What they don't realize is what we are is we're trying to build a community the way communities used to be. And that is through mentorship, that is through training, bringing people along. So what we have is we have essentially stewards. They're in charge of certain things because they have particular expertise and experience in that field. But we also have committees with that. So for example, I'm the police liaison because I know how to deal with the police and how to deal with gangs and things like that. But I have a committee, and I have people on that committee that have never been part of any organization before. And so I'm passing those skills on to them, and then they will be taking over for me down the road. And we're just keep cycling these roles. The idea is we train people and pass experience as a community and not have this centralized leadership that is so common in our society, because that's part of what we're trying to change, is this top-down kind of system. So there we go.
And I think another thing on top of the whole leadership thing and identifiable leaders is that, as we just heard from Bill, police and politicians, they do target identifiable leaders that they perceive. And so if there ever was a big sweep-in where they took out our media spokesperson, our police liaison, you know, certain people performing core roles or whatever, that has a way of destabilizing movements. So if you have, you know, you take out one and there's 5 more people ready to take their place, that's sort of a sustainability thing. And it also speaks to the issue of burnout, which is that if you're in a role for too long, you might burn out. You know, maybe you're not doing that great of a role because you're frustrated and tired. Maybe, you know, as media liaison, I was the former media liaison, and eventually the media gets tired of you. You know, they're like, all right, you're not answering the question again. So it's just good to just keep things moving for our internal reasons, for external reasons, and yeah, to really change our political culture of the idea that you have leaders You tell them to do something, and then they don't do something, and then you become cynical. Because that's what we're currently living in everywhere else, and so we don't want to reproduce that, because that's not working out there, so it's not going to work in here.
The next question was next steps. Immediately on the forefront is we're probably being evicted tomorrow at around 7 o'clock. 11 o'clock, sorry. 11 o'clock is the time that they're giving us to get out. So if you can come down and support us, or get people that you know to come down and support us, that would be awesome. We'd really appreciate that. Although they're more likely to show up between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning, like they usually do. But 11 o'clock is the time that they've given us. Otherwise, next steps, I'm assuming that's also in terms of action. Right now we have a number of actions planned. For example, the company that had Occupy Wall Street evicted from Zuccotti Park is actually a Canadian company, and they have some assets near us. So we're going to go and occupy their offices. Yeah, that stays here. It doesn't leave around. And there's a number of other actions like that. We're planning some banks, some things like that. The question that people have had is what are you really there for? Because it just looks like we're sitting in a park, right? We haven't been doing a lot of actions because we've been winterizing, and we've been establishing how our functions are. And that takes time. It takes a lot of work. Sometimes our GAs can be like 4 hours long, and we're on one topic. Because we have to come to a consensus about how we're going to proceed with things, and that means everybody's got to have their say. So now that we're done with that, we're going to be doing a lot more actions, and so if you have any ideas, please come down, or please fire them to us, and we'd love to work with you on that.
But also, someone set us up with a phone line, so you can actually phone in and hear, like, it's just getting going, but it's like updates and what's coming up. And as far as action details go, and it's nonviolent direct action, it's kind of hard to broadcast that because you don't want to give away all your tricks. But there's a bunch of other things like injustice hotline. We're trying to set up a hotline, so if you've been screwed over at work, if you've been, you know, if there's an issue going on in your community, because we have been getting some phone calls that way, that you can just sort of call, leave a message, someone will get back to you. So check out the website. We'll eventually post all of our hotline information as it comes along. The next question, hippies. What's the difference between us and hippies? I don't really know. I wasn't there for that generation, so yeah. We're the people who set the precedent. I don't really know how to answer that. I think that that generation definitely got the ball rolling, and it definitely got a lot of conversations started, and that there's definitely a lot of like continuation from there. I don't really know if that movement ever went away, or just sort of went underground, or it started transforming, taking up different spaces in society. But what's really interesting for me as an organizer who came out of the university space is that it's actually really like interesting that it's not a university-centric organizing space, and that has different learning challenges. You know, that there's definitely a lot of people on different pages. You know, sometimes there can be very different community norms that you're not used to as an organizer, because you're not really used to you know, working with, like, for me, I'm a feminist and working sometimes with some of the tradesmen. I know that's a generalization. But, you know, they just sort of say things every so often that you're like, hey, what's that all about? You realize, well, because I come from a university education background, I've become used to working with people who have certain expectations, and like the idea of a safe space, and what does that really mean? I'd say that that there's definitely a lot of different levels of energy. There's a lot of new movement energy. There's people who this is their first sort of action, or their first thing that they've been part of, and they've reminded me, as someone who's been organizing for a while, the kind of energy that I've forgotten I used to have, where one guy, before it all even started, he walked up and down White Avenue giving out hundreds and hundreds of pamphlets, and like, I you know what I mean? I'm so jaded now that I'm like, oh, and we make the pamphlet, no one takes them. But like, you know what I mean? So it's really collaborative that way, because it's a symbiotic relationship, I think. How can we afford to be there? I guess I sort of addressed that a bit. Some people, I'd also like to say, have lost their jobs and are facing like punishment from their employers, and I don't really think that relates so much to sick days as much as employers knowing that they're participating in Occupy Edmonton. So if anyone out there knows labor lawyers or labor law, please get in touch. We're looking for a way to fight back on that. And I guess it's the thing is that when you have, a lot of people do have work down there, and that they come in the evenings and weekends, so it's become like a part-time job, or you know what I mean? It's become like the second thing that you're doing in your life, and that can become really taxing too. And so in a lot of ways, you know, the more community support we have coming out, the better. You were going to talk to organized labor support?
Yeah. Okay, organized labor support. We need you guys. We need you guys very badly. No movement will progress without the support of labor. And in order for us to progress, we need you guys to come there. Anything that you guys can provide is awesome. We need people, even if it's just a full marshal shift for like 2 hours, that would be awesome. And what a marshal is kind of like our private security service. They walk around and patrol the premises. They make sure things are all okay. Medics, any nurses, the nurses unions, please, we need you. We only have 2 or 3 girls that are ladies that can, sorry, I'm trying to correct my language. Hanging out with her gets you to change your language pretty quickly. Sorry. We need more medics because, especially as it's getting cold, we need people who are trained to monitor the signs of illness, and the 3 ladies who are doing it are getting burnt out. So we need nurses unions, definitely. With labor, people to show up and support us. Any supplies that you guys can bring, build construction material for certain things, tents, food, anything would be awesome.
There's actually, I wrote out a list of things we need right over there and ways to get involved. So I didn't want to explain all of these, but if you have any interest in these roles, or if you have any way to help out with these things, please email, get in touch, or email, get in touch, or talk to us after. Also, I have a sign-up sheet here if you want to join our listservs, where you can hear about ongoing dynamics and needs of the camp. Another thing about organized labor is that I would like to thank CUPW for the first 28 days of porta potties that we had. That was awesome. Bathrooms in the middle of the night were really important. And also the AFL donated a big tent that we use for we were using it for our kitchen. And so that's really, really rad too. And we've got some other union support, UFCW, they gave us some money for a barbecue to celebrate our 1-month anniversary. So what we're trying to do from a finance fundraise point of view is have project funding, where instead of just asking, like, just give us some money, you know, that we understand that you have to sort of tie it to something. So get in touch with our finance fundraising group, because that way we can fund something like porta potties, where it's like, if anyone ever gives you any heat, you know, from like, hey, why are you helping out that terrorist organization? You'd be like, hey, I give them porta potties. Like, it's not that big of a deal. They have to go to the bathroom. I guess so on clear demands. That's a tricky one because, we've spent so much time winterizing and really trying to create a space where we can talk about those things that it's kind of dominated the conversation a bit. Also, demands would be aimed at various levels. We have an awareness of the municipal level versus the provincial level versus the federal level, and that's just on the government side of things. And then there's sort of corporations themselves. And there's a big debate of should we ask corporations, should we ask the government who's supposed to regulate them? So we're really trying to like come around to that conversation, but that will take time, like Bill said. And I think that, we need to be able to get on the same page. Like if we're changing the political culture, how we have those conversations will be difficult, because instead of saying, the real issue is, instead of hierarchicalizing an understanding of like what real issues are and what fake issues are, and then some people feel alienated because they don't think that their issues being taken seriously, we don't want to reproduce that in our space. So, we have to do a lot of work on how we communicate with each other and how we want to build an understanding that isn't exclusive, that isn't, going to marginalize certain points of view. We did some actions around the city, around the municipality issue of the arena. we sort of put forward that we'd rather have the $10.5 million in service cuts not happen, and that we don't spend all that money on an arena for the private profits of 1%. And so in a lot of ways, our actions really shape like they're co-constitutive, they work together. Our actions are driving our demands are driving our actions. But stay tuned, we'll have a whole pile of them real soon. It's going to be very exciting.
Explain your hand motions.
Oh.
Sure, okay, so do you want to do them? So this one is kind of like a consensus agreement. This one is kind of like, I'm kind of in the middle. And this one's disagree, so I really don't like, but it's like, you can still come to a consensus and do this, it just sort of means that you are in disagreement. Then there's stand aside, so like, I'm not going to block it, I'm not going to stop something from happening, but I don't really like it. And then there's block, which is like, no, if this goes ahead, I'm going to walk out of here, leave this process, and never come back. And usually if you block, it's sort of expected that you might have an alternative proposal to bridge the various conversations. There's this, which is like, I don't understand what you're talking about, what do you mean? There's also, this is be louder, so because we don't have microphones and stuff, it's like, do this, and then people hopefully catch it up. This one, that one is, okay, I get your point, it's, move along, you're kind of reiterating yourself now. And it's usually, it's not sort of disrespectful, it's just sort of meant to be like, okay, I think, we're showing understanding here. We have point, which is just I have something to say. And then we have direct point, which is like I have a direct point to that. So it's like a critical piece of information that before we continue making decisions, we got to hear about an update maybe from the police liaison, or maybe we have to hear an update about some legality that we didn't think about. That's either proposal or point of process. So if we're getting off the agenda, we can do that and say, hey, we're not on the agenda. Or also if you have a proposal to move us forwards, we can go there. That means derogatory. So something you've heard, you don't want to point it out and stop the process, but you just like to be like, that's kind of derogatory. It's like a good way to sort of show that other people saw it and that you're not alone in seeing something maybe offensive. And I think that's the ones, those are the major ones that we run into. What reaction we're looking for? I mean, that's also really dependent on who's doing the looking for a reaction. I think that myself personally, I think that just people talking about what we're doing is like a goal or a reaction in and of itself. I think that occupying a lot of the newspapers lately is something I was looking for. That people are actually out there trying to push something, being like, another world is possible, let's talk about it. I even like it when people stop by the park and they're not entirely convinced by what we're doing, but they want to just come down and talk. I think that that's really, really awesome because it means, you're not really sure what we're doing, but you have an open mind to come down. There's all kinds of reactions I think that different people are looking for. It depends on what you're hoping to do in your time down there. Do you have anything to add to that?
What I'm looking for is to see this world change, right? And I need to see people come down and to support us. That's what I need. I want to see people talking about what's really going on instead of just accepting the status quo and accepting what they're told. I want to see people questioning what they're being told and talking about it amongst themselves and forming their own opinions and then acting upon what their principles are. So that's okay, the next one is life after occupying the park. I haven't really thought about that myself. I'm kind of living there, so what we do after the park. We've kind of discussed this, but there's a core group of us that doesn't plan on leaving the park until the world changes. So, yeah, I talked to the cops, and the cops told us, you're on the 7 to 10 year plan, and I'm like, yeah, that's how long it takes. So, yeah, that's what plan I'm on. I don't know how to answer that question.
There's been some ideas also that if we get evicted from this park, we could go set up in other locations. We've looked at different locations and what they offer. There's also the idea that maybe we go indoors, maybe we set up a squat somewhere and reclaim some buildings that are just not being used. We could also sort of get ready for the spring. you know. So there's a bunch of different discussions on after this particular park that we're in, but as far as, you know, meeting our demands and meeting our goals, it's a bit abstract, because like I said, we haven't really got there, but a lot of people are just on the consensus page that, you know, we need to see change, we need to see it happen. There was this ridiculous poll in a bunch of newspapers that was like, have they achieved their point? And you're like, what? We're just getting started, like what you're talking about. So, yeah, life's just sort of getting going in the park. We are winterized now. How do we focus on the messaging and not just like camp issues? That's really, really difficult, because the media gets into their heads like, okay, we're gonna go get the story, we're gonna go down there, we're gonna hear about what's going on with winterization. And so we do these things where we're like, well, we're winterizing so we can continue to push for policies that will work for and not against the 99% of us. And they just like, okay, but then what kind of tents are you getting? We're getting tents that we can organize within to resist the changes for the 99% of us. And like every time they just want to keep telling the story of like, you know, what are you eating? We're eating food that will feed us so that we can continue to resist and organize for the 99%. And, you know, there's only so many ways to get to the and it's sad that the story really sticks to that issue. Yeah.
One of the things with the media too is they're owned by the people that we're fighting, so you really can't trust what they're saying. I myself have done 7 interviews for Occupy, and not one single time was I properly represented. They misquoted me a number of times, and in one of them, out of a 10-minute interview, they used half a sentence out of context. So with them, the problem is we keep reiterating why we're there, as Chelsea mentioned, and they don't print it. They cut it out. They do whatever. So we have to really, my personal opinion is in how we do our actions, we got to do them so much that people can't ignore them, and that the press can't ignore it, and people will witness it when they see the coverage. They'll be able to see that, yeah, the press is lying. That's not what I saw. So.
And that just sort of quickly on media. One thing is that a bunch of different reporters told me, like, yeah, I'm with you, and like, don't be mad at me that my boss is going to cut this up and turn it into something else. Ask you really nice questions. I was like, great. That's, you know, I met this other guy, an editor, he's like, hey, I've been cutting your quotes, and you know, you're doing really great, but then I send it to my bosses and they send it back. That's really frustrating. And another thing on media is like alternative media, right? Is that, so we really need to just, sometimes people have had debates about why don't we just only talk to alternative media? If the media is going to show up anyway, we just don't answer stupid questions. We answer like the good questions that are like, so what do you really want to do here? And you're like, oh, great. But, you know, we'll figure that one out. I mean, another thing is that for some of the new energy that's come into the movement is that it's that exact sort of portrayal. I think that that's a long-term goal for me, or that's a great outcome, is that people, just like with the G20 in Toronto, just like with all these things, they learn, A, the police are actually like this, not like that, and B, the media misrepresented your issues so badly, so how are you so sure that they're representing all the other issues very well either? So the next time you pick up the paper, you're a bit more cynical, you're a bit like, hey, wait a minute, remember when they covered the thing I was in, and then they said this, and that wasn't really true? So I think that with or without their knowing it, they're implanting distrust for their own institutions by doing this. So I think they're doomed. I think that's about it. I would just on the other ways of support, I'll point to our needs over there. Basically things to stay warm, things to be fed by, donations of cold hard cash so we can stay warm, you know. And expertise is that right now we're also looking for various legal supports on labor, on criminal, on bylaws, and that is especially earmarked for a potential move somewhere else. The CCLA did get in touch with all the Occupy movements. They sent a letter of support saying if there's anything going on, do get in touch. But to have local connections as well, that would be really great. And I think that's it for the questions, so I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
We had only gotten to half the groups before, so if your questions weren't asked and answered, Scott and Mike are around with the microphones. Let's take a bunch more questions for Chelsea and Bill.
Hi, I'm really scared to ask this question, actually. I'm not really sure if there's so many educated and really well-informed people here, and I guess one of the things that I struggle with is how Occupy Edmonton can overcome a label, like earlier you mentioned in joking, you know, a terrorist organization, or Leo Panish called it street theater yesterday. It seems like this whole conference is centered on this idea that we the people need to identify as the working class in all the incarnations that we take. Whether you are without a home in downtown Edmonton, whether you are a social worker, whether you are a nurse, whether you are an electrician, we all need to identify and really organize en masse to get the type of change that we want. And so how will Occupy Edmonton, or how can we help remove that stigma or that label of these, you know, extremists, to say that, you know what, this is a faction of our group, and you know what, they are brave enough to do something that I can't do myself. And how do we overcome this to really recognize the unity in all of us?
The day that so many hundreds of people gathered in Churchill Square was heartening, and it was energizing. And I feel that since that time, I feel there's been more and more of a disconnect between the investment that you're making by being there and going through the processes that you're going through, but it's not engaging people so I don't think you can engage people at that level on a daily basis, but I guess this is more of a hope that as you continue to explore strategies, that you look at ways that have, at least at different points in time, opportunities for people to show that kind of support, because I think it does help people to continue to tell the story because they feel connected.
I believe there are about 1,400 Occupies in the world, and specifically, how is Occupy Edmonton connected with these? Not on a philosophical, but on a tangible level. Have you had any connection with any of these others? Thank you.
Okay. What I actually want to say is not basically a question, but I want to say the Occupy itself, more especially the ones that have been seen all over the world, more especially the ones that you guys are doing, I just want to say, to extend an appreciation of what you guys are doing, because I personally know that it's not everybody who actually understands what's happening with the Occupy and what Occupy stands for. But I want to say, Anuta Kontinua, we are all in this struggle.
How about we let Bill and Chelsea respond to one more, and then we'll let Bill and Chelsea respond.
Hi, I'm just getting a little bit confused because there's Occupy movements all over the world. And as far as I can tell, there are some global issues, but a lot of the global issues are so broad that communities cannot relate to them. Like the Robin Hood tax, for example, while I understand that maybe if it was put into effect, it would affect my life, but something like the hockey rink seems a lot closer to home. And it's something that I would stand up and back, as opposed to the Robin Hood tax, which seems so abstract to me, that I wouldn't go to a rally for it, because it doesn't feel like it's directly impacting my life. And I'm just wondering, if you're going to unite, or you're going to connect with the Occupy movements across the world, how are you going to mobilize individual communities if you're not going to deal with their issues as well?
Okay, who do we got? Oh, okay. Labels, overcoming, and identification. The perceptions. Well, I don't really know how to do that. I mean, the machine is so odious, so, you know, throw your body on it. I don't know. It's like, I kind of feel like my perception, speaking personally, is that if you don't read The Sun and other outlets, like, you actually feel really supported. Like, people come down all the time, bringing down food, all kinds of ages, all kinds of people. And it's really more so in the machine of the media where you get these labels. I mean, you know, it's just, that's my perception of that. As far as like identification, is that there are issues down in the camp of like what the, like I said, about what the real issue is and how we should really move forwards. And some people have said, no, it's a working class movement, and other people say, well, wait a minute, like I don't want to be a second class citizen in a movement where my big issue is feminism, and I don't want to be a second class citizen if my big issue is this and that. And so I think in a lot of ways it's hard to put forward that first step about, you know, what we think we are until we've had those internal conversations amongst ourselves and how we're going to sort of present that out to the world. That if we get caught up in working class, you know, vocabulary, that we can kind of maybe alienate people who don't really identify necessarily entirely with, first of all, the working class movement, but various other struggles. So I think that there's that, and I think that once we kind of get on the same page, we can really move ahead. I think that's what I was going to say. Do you want to answer the
Okay, yeah, how to re-engage our numbers, that was your question?
I guess it's a collective, because we can do it individually, but it's that collective.
Yeah. We do, from time to time, we are going to have big events like that for mass engagement. I don't know of any in the works at the moment, but we're definitely be trying to do that. But on a smaller scale, again, constantly checking what we're doing. There be things all the time. We have, as we mentioned, there's a list of things that people can do to get involved, even just like one day a week for a couple hours. That's a way of keeping engaged. And so that's really all I can say is like come down, get involved. Or you don't even necessarily have to, like my big thing, personal thing is coming down and getting involved. But there's all sorts of things you can do. There's web support, there's, you know, getting calls out and answering calls and things like that. There's all sorts of things that you can do to get involved, just even for an hour or two a week. That would be awesome. Okay, how we're connected to the other Occupies. We have had a financial donation from Wall Street, and we've been in yes. Yeah, the Occupy Wall Street.
Wall Street.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we just call it Wall Street, but Occupy Wall Street. It has given us a lot of money, which has been awesome. We've also had direct communication with them. One of our members went down there for a while. She's now with Victoria right now. So she's down in Victoria and Vancouver, building relationships there. We've had a couple people go, Chelsea included, go down to Calgary, and a couple people from Calgary come up here. A couple people from Red Deer. Red Deer had an indoor kind of thing going on, so a couple of them have come up. So that's what we're trying to do, is it's going to be face-to-face kind of a thing. I mean, there's lots of internet connections, obviously, through Facebook and stuff like that. But we are trying to build face-to-face relationships, possibly with Calgary doing some joint actions on issues that affect the province and the country. And that's about it that I can do for that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, also on that is that there have been some Skype dates between other Occupies. So I know that Occupy Toronto Skyped into Occupy somewhere else, I forget. And so there's the technology there. The whole issue is like having a regular stream broadcast and using up those internet sticks and technology. And now that it's -30, your screen would freeze. So, but yeah, we are looking for those connections. I grew up in Toronto and I lived in Ottawa for 5 years, so I have some roots in both. So I've been sort of watching their Occupies as well, getting their updates. And on the question of sort of the global to local Robin Hood tax, individual or localized communities thing, I think that the Robin Hood tax was interesting because it was all along the media narrative of our finance minister Jim Flaherty going to the G20 and saying, "I will not allow a Robin Hood tax to happen." And a lot of people at camp weren't really comfortable with the idea of like asking only for this tiny, pitiful tax. But I think it was sort of explained that if all you're asking for is a 0.05% tax, it's kind of a win-win situation where it's either they do it and you get this tiny tax, you get billions of dollars. And sure, there's questions of administration and all those things, but that would be kind of a rad step. But it's more like the fact that we showed that our finance minister can't even commit to a 0.05% tax on the financial market. I mean, that's kind of a win-win for us in that demand, where I think that that definitely had a lot more media consideration, and because we were responding to what Jim Flaherty already said, that was kind of the decision-making there, I think. And then I guess another thing is on the local scale that yes, we have been engaged on the issue of the arena. We did go down and disrupt the proceedings at one point. We did go to, we also gave, we were getting criticized by Mandel in the media saying that we were plugged into the power, we were, using the power. Which they told us we could do. So we went down with nickels and dimes and gave him $150 in nickels and dimes and told him to get back to work on solving our problems and not cutting. Just like going down there asking for a meeting and then being like, hey, here's a bunch of money, it should pay our power bill. Now, how about you try to find ways to not cut $10.5 million from our services? So there has been that local engagement. We also went to when the session at the legislature reopened for the 2 days. 2 days they were going to solve the global financial crisis in 2 days. So we went down there. We also had a banner that said, change the system, not just the premier. We held it in the gallery. People were escorted out. And yeah, so along the same messaging where, this isn't a tactic that has a definite goal where it's like, yay, we stopped the legislature. But I don't know if that would be the goal. But it definitely had so far we've been very media driven in our direct actions. And I think that sort of localizes it where in a lot of the media messaging we've been talking about how Alberta is a great example of what Wall Street was protesting, is that it's corporate influence over government policy, which just look at the government of Alberta. You can point anywhere you want, and you're going to win. And so pointing at that close relationship and showing how much the government isn't acting in the interests of people. And at the municipal scale, same with the arena, where there was polls saying 60% of Edmontonians were against this arena, and there was public input and people were expressing their frustration, and they just went ahead and did it anyway. And so I think that we here in Alberta, we do have that. Very much so, if not more pronounced than other jurisdictions. At the federal level as well, I mean, just to do with their policies on environmental enforcements and the fact that they're going to do a wolf cull in order to save the caribou, you're just like, really? It couldn't be more obvious to me, I don't know. But as for impacting communities and actually bringing about change at the local level, that's something else that we really just continue to need to identify our targets, identify what our issues are, and have a diversity of tactics, where right now we've been very media driven, but we might shift tactics very soon. And that I'm of the school that, a diversity of tactics means that, you don't compete over, we should do this, no, we should do this, we should do both. So the more action, the better, right? We don't have to sit around and convince each other, no, petitions are the way, no, occupying it is the way, no. It's that we can do everything and anything that lets these people know that, you're supposed to be serving the public interest. So I think it's just continuing that momentum. I think that's it for questions. How are we on time? Just about.